Okay, we are live. Hello, good evening, and welcome back to the Law Entrance YouTube channel and to another class of logical reasoning. My name is Kovind Singh, and today's class is gonna be in continuation of the previous logical reasoning class, and the topic is assumptions. So, we have already done assumptions as a theoretical concept, and we have also practiced a few questions in the previous session. This session is a continuation of the previous class. We will be practicing some more questions on assumptions so that the concept is consolidated and exported by all of you. Priyanshi is here. Good evening, Priyanshi. Also, we did not have the Hindu analysis today because we did not have the Hindu newspaper today. So, no Hindu analysis. You get the drift. By the way, tomorrow it would continue as planned because we're hoping that the newspaper would be published tomorrow. So, Hindu analysis would go on as planned tomorrow at 3 p.m. as well. So, make sure you don't miss it. That being said, let's start today's class on assumptions K practice questions. How many of you are here with me in the class? Can you guys tell me in the chat box? I can see four people live on my screen. Okay, there's the presentation. Here we go. So, a quick recap as to what are assumptions. I think we have discussed this twice now, but just before we start practicing questions, assumptions are essentially the link or the bridge between your premise and the conclusion. They connect your premise and the conclusion in such a way that if you take away your assumption, your argument, the logical argument, which consists of the premise, conclusion, and assumption, falls apart, which also gives rise to the rule of negation that if you negate an assumption, your argument falls apart. If that is the case, that is a valid assumption. So, assumption is basically something which is not mentioned in the argument, it is something which is implied, it is something which is hidden, it is something which is unstated, but very fundamental to the existence of your logical argument, right? So, the example which I give always, I study every day for the CLAT exam, therefore I have a better chance of cracking it. Now, here the premise is I study every day for the CLAT exam. The conclusion is therefore I have a better chance of cracking it. But what are we assuming? What is the assumption? What is connecting these two statements and making it a logical sentence? Is that people who study every day have a better chance of cracking the CLAT exam. That is an assumption. It's not given. It's not written in the logical argument that you have to study every day. That would mean having a better chance. But that is something we are assuming. On the basis of that assumption, we are making this particular statement that if you study every day, you have a better chance. Correct? So that is basically the whole fundamental idea as to what are assumptions in context of logical reasoning. That being said, let's start looking at some questions. Are we ready to start questions? Priyanshi is saying, when will Menti quizzes start? Menti quizzes will start most likely by next week. I'm assuming that we would have at least 15, 20 people in the sessions, in the GK sessions especially, by the next week. So, yeah, most likely Monday. And worst case scenario would be the next Monday. So, yeah, that's the plan. But yeah, bring your friends, bring all your aspirant friends to the stream so that we can start it as soon as possible. That being said, let's look at the question. Let's start solving some questions. How many of you are here with me on the stream? Can you guys quickly give me yes in the chat box if you guys are ready to begin? I can see Priyanshi in the chat box. Who all are there in the chat box? Are we ready to begin? Can I have a very quick yes in the chat box if I'm audible, visible, and we are ready to start practicing some questions? I've kept easy questions for today, short questions, easy questions. Okay, not a lot of audience today. That's fine. Let's proceed with solving our questions. Okay, so that is the first question for you on your screen. You guys have 30 seconds to give me the right answer. Let's do it. Okay, answers, people. Okay, Priyanshi says D. Chalo, ठीक है, let's check this out. The question says car makers are taking the middle path in their electrification journey in India with powerful hybrids flagging off the green race for three leading car manufacturers, Japanese car manufacturers. Japanese car makers believe introducing hybrids will eventually lead to higher localization of parts for electric vehicles, making them more accessible to a larger customer base. These manufacturers have no plans of launching an electric car in India before 2025 and are currently working on localization of hybrid vehicle parts. Now you say D. D says there will be no electric car production in India until 2025. Now there are two ways to look at option number D. One is you could say this is a restatement of the point mentioned in the passage, which makes it not the right assumption because assumptions are something which are unstated. Assumptions are hidden. Assumptions are not explicit. So this definitely cannot be an assumption based on that logic. But if you use a different logic, which is the normal basic critical reasoning wala logic, so देखो यहाँ पे बात हो रही है these manufacturers की. Which these manufacturers? The three leading Japanese car manufacturers. They have no plans of launching an electric car before 2025. Option D बात कर रहा है there will be no electric car production in India until 2025. Firstly, extreme option, extreme word that there would be no electric car production. Secondly, when you see यहाँ पे क्या they are saying about the three Japanese car makers? No, they are saying होगा ही नहीं electric car production. हमारा पैसेज हमें सिर्फ इतना बताता है कि ये तीन कंपनीज नहीं बनाएंगी. ऐसा हो सकता है देर आर अदर इंडियन कंपनीज और यूएस बेस्ड कंपनीज हु आर गोइंग टू प्रोड्यूस इलेक्ट्रिक कार, सो वी कैनॉट रियली अज्यूम that there will be no electric car production in India until 2025, which makes it a wrong option. Now let's look at the other three. Car makers in Japan have been successful in scaling up production of electric vehicles in the past. Do we really know this from the piece of information we have that they have been successful in scaling up production? We don't have enough information to say that. So not the right assumption. Indian customers are unable to afford electric vehicles. Is there any indication about pricing, finances, affordability? Not really. We cannot say anything about Indians being able to afford or not being able to afford. So B is also eliminated. Now C says manufacturing processes for electric and hybrid vehicles are similar to the extent that production of the latter, यानी कि production of hybrid, would ease production of the former, यानी कि for the electric, which aligns with your argument as well. देखो Japanese car makers क्या कर रहे हैं कि पहले वो hybrids की तरफ जा रहे हैं. They are introducing hybrids. They are taking the middle path. They are proceeding with powerful hybrids, flagging off the journey, and this will eventually lead to higher localization of parts for EV. यानी कि अगर आप हाइब्रिड्स इंट्रोड्यूस करते हो तो आगे चल के ईवीज के लिए पार्ट्स प्रोक्योर करना इजी हो जाएगा. इट वुड बी मेकिंग देम मोर एक्सेसिबल टू अ लार्जर कस्टमर बेस. तो दिस ऑलवेज अलाइंस विद योर ऑब्वियसली अलाइंस विद योर पैसेज एज वेल कि जो प्रोडक्शन है hybrids का, that would ease production of the former, the electrics. So this becomes our correct assumption based on the information in the passage, based on the context, and also based on elimination. Right? I hope this is clear. This was understood. Okay. Yes, the right answer is option number C. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is a different style of question. You have a statement. Based on that statement, you have one, two, three assumptions. You have to tell which of the following are valid assumptions. Okay, Priyanshi says A, Anurit says C. Let's check this one. Employers must offer flexible working schedules or risk resignations by talented employees. यानी कि employers अगर flexible working schedules नहीं देंगे तो talented employees resignation दे सकते हैं. There is a risk. Now, assumptions. Employers should offer flexible working schedules. Now, tell me, is this an assumption which is connecting the premise to the conclusion, or is this an inference, or is this a solution? Is this something which we are assuming? क्या ये स्टेटमेंट से पहले आ रहा है? क्या ये हमारा assumption है जिसके बेसिस पे हमने ये स्टेटमेंट दिया होगा? Not really. राइट अगर हम इसको नेगेट भी करके देखें एम्प्लॉयर शुड नॉट ऑफर फ्लेक्सिबल वर्किंग शेड्यूल्स और स्टेटमेंट कह रहा है एम्प्लॉयर्स मस्ट ऑफर फ्लेक्सिबल वर्किंग शेड्यूल्स और रेसिग्नेशन डज नॉट रियली मेक अ लॉट ऑफ सेंस यू नो so I don't think one is a valid assumption. Let's look at option two. Some employees want flexible working schedules. Now this is something which we can assume क्योंकि अगर कुछ एम्प्लॉयज नहीं चाहते फ्लेक्सिबल वर्किंग शेड्यूल्स तो why would you even think of offering flexible working schedules or risking resignations? ऐसा है कि कुछ एम्प्लॉयज डेफिनेटली फ्लेक्सिबल वर्किंग शेड्यूल्स चाहते हैं वरना वो रिजाइन कर देंगे दैट इज व्हाट द स्टेटमेंट सेज सो दिस इज एन assumption which we can make 100%. Then some employees value flexible working schedules so much that they would resign if these are not offered. Now, this is something which is also an assumption because if we negate this, some employees do not value flexible working schedule so much that they would resign. This would not really align with the statement. Your statement would again fall apart if you negate this assumption because they और रिस्क रेजिग्नेशन बाय टैलेंटेड एम्प्लॉयज अब यहाँ पे टैलेंटेड एम्प्लॉयज को हम सम एम्प्लॉयज बोल सकते हैं बिकॉज वी डोंट नो हाउ मेनी एम्प्लॉयज आर टैलेंटेड और या है ना तो ऑल में से कुछ एम्प्लॉयज जो टैलेंटेड है उनको हम सम एम्प्लॉयज बोल देते हैं लेट्स से employers must offer flexible working schedules or risk resignation by some employers so that means that some employers value it so much कि वो resign कर देंगे अगर उनको नहीं मिला तो that is what it's saying that they must offer flexible working schedules वरना some employees would resign there is a risk of them resigning right so this is also a valid assumption so both 2 and 3 are implicit assumptions one is not that employers should offer flexible working schedules no not really अगर employers को नहीं चाहिए talented employees तो it's fine like who are we to decide so option number A becomes the correct answer that both 2 and 3 are implicit so Priyanshi's answer was correct good job moving ahead let's move on to the next question okay Priyanshi says B any other responses by anyone else चलो ठीक है let's check this even though switching to veganism may be costly and sometimes inconvenient, it is a good change if one wishes to improve their chances of leading a healthy life while benefiting the environment. Which of the following is an assumption necessarily taken for granted in the above statement? Basically, I have to tell the assumption. A says the cost involved and inconvenience of making a change acts as a deterrent for most people. Now, this is again an inference, first of all. Secondly, the cost in making a change acting as deterrent for most people, this is very broad as a statement. This is way too vague as a statement, right? So cannot really say this is the right assumption. इसको हम negate भी करके देखें cost involved is not acting as a deterrent for most people, your argument still holds, है ना? और जरूरी नहीं है कि the cost and inconvenience is the reason why most people are not choosing veganism. It could be their personal choice. जरूरी थोड़ी है कि सब लोग गरीब हैं या फिर उन लोगों के लिए inconvenient है. It could be that they actually don't want to switch to veganism. So we cannot really assume this. So A is definitely wrong. B is saying it is possible to undertake practices that may impact how healthy a life one lives. No, this is definitely something which we are assuming, because if we do not assume this, your argument would make no sense. कि अगर possible ही नहीं है, if I say it is not possible to undertake practices that may impact how healthy one lives, would switching to veganism make any sense? Because possible ही नहीं है कुछ ऐसा करना जिससे आप healthy life जी सको. So B is definitely a valid assumption. Let's look at the other ones. Non-vegetarianism impacts the environment most adversely. First of all, extreme option, and cannot really assume this that it impacts the environment most adversely. We don't know what are the other factors impacting the environment, so cannot really assume this. Costly and inconvenient choices must always be made to affect positive change. Not really. I mean, cannot really make a blanket statement saying always be made. So again, extreme option wrong, extreme wrong, irrelevant and inference wrong. B again emerges to be the correct answer. So B is correct. Anurit is saying maybe C. देखो C क्या है? Non-vegetarian impacts the environment most adversely. Can you assume that it is impacting the environment most adversely? Do we know the other factors? Do we know how is pollution impacting? Do we know how is let's say lifestyle choices impacting? Do we know how is global warming impacting? No, you don't know any of these things. So you cannot really say most adversely. हमें सिर्फ बेनिफिट बताया गया कि हाँ ठीक है veganism से बेनिफिट होता है एनवायरनमेंट को, बट सबसे ज्यादा बेनिफिट होता है ऐसा तो कुछ नहीं लिखा. So that is why we cannot really assume option C. Negation test भी अगर आप यूज करके देखो, non-vegetarianism does not impact the environment most adversely. Your argument still stands. Ki switching to veganism can benefit the environment. Still correct. So that is why not option C. We would go with option number B. I hope that is clear. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next one. Question number 4. Okay, Priyanshi says C. Okay. Is this an assumption on the basis of which this has been said? Or is this something which we are deriving after reading all this as an inference? Think about that. Is this something coming before your argument or something which is coming after your argument? Yes, it's an inference, correct. The right answer is option number B, and let's see why. देखो, they are saying best telecom services हैं जापान में और साउथ कोरिया में, and none of them are giving it on the basis of auction, यानी कि वो बेच नहीं रहे स्पेक्ट्रम. स्पेक्ट्रम इज असाइंड बेस्ड ऑन डिस्क्रिशन कि जिसका सबसे बेस्ट है टेक्नोलॉजी एंड जिसका रेवेन्यू सुपर इंडस्ट्री जो उससे बन जाएगी टेलीकॉम की आफ्टर दे make this spectrum rather than generating revenue from spectrum auctions. Neither the Japanese or Koreans are squeamish about eating almost anything that creeps, crawls, flies, swims, or runs. But when it comes to geese that lay golden eggs, सोने का अंडा देने वाली मुर्गी अगर कोई चीज है, यानी कि यहाँ पे स्पेक्ट्रम, they will apparently lay off, तो उससे दूर रहेंगे. ठीक है, तो ये तो irrelevant है. Geese are, ये तो उसने example दिया. This is not an assumption he's making. Government that wish to provide good telecom service should not auction telecom spectrum. This is an inference which you are making. Government that wish to provide good telecom service should auction. ये तो inference है, but inference भी गलत है ये. So by elimination, you are left with option B, but option B also makes sense as an assumption because it says auctioning telecom spectrum would generate a great deal of revenue for the Japanese and South Korean governments. क्योंकि अगर ऐसा नहीं होता तो first of all वो उसको geese that lay golden eggs नहीं बोलता. One thing. Secondly, ये पूरा चर्चा ही नहीं होती ना कि why are they auctioning or not auctioning it. They are not auctioning it and focusing on providing cutting edge services, and then from the revenue which the super enabled industry would generate, यानी कि वो अगर कॉम्प्रोमाइज कर रहे हैं इस रेवेन्यू को, इस रेवेन्यू के लिए, तो मतलब ये भी काफी बड़ा रेवेन्यू होगा, तभी उसकी बात हो रही है. अगर ऐसा कुछ सिग्निफिकेंट नहीं होता ये जो जनरेट होगा रेवेन्यू स्पेक्ट्रम ऑक्शन से, तो this would not even make sense, right? कि you are preventing that and all those things. So B becomes the correct answer. Correct. All right. Moving on to question number 5. Okay, Priyanshi says B. Slime World is saying we aren't talking about government, so C and D are inference. अच्छा, पिछले question का कह रहे हो आप. Priyanshi says fifth is B. Gayatri is saying C. Okay, let's check. Even before the coronavirus, lack of sleep was a simmering public health crisis associated with a suite of maladies. Roughly 10 to 15% of people worldwide were suffering from chronic insomnia. They struggled to fall or stay asleep at least 3 nights a week for 3 months or longer. Crises such as natural disasters or terrorist attack are known to trigger short-term sleeplessness. But experts say the pandemic's unprecedented global impact and protracted nature threaten to expand the rate of chronic insomnia, which is much harder to treat. Expand the rate of chronic insomnia मतलब वो एक तरीके से long term sleeplessness बन जाती है, which is much harder to treat. Now, which of the following is an assumption required by the argument? यानी कि जरूरी है वो आर्ग्यूमेंट के लिए. Increasing levels of obesity in the world population have exacerbated, यानी कि increased chronic. No, there's no talk of obesity. This is irrelevant. Treatment of chronic insomnia is costly for public health systems. First of all, this is not an assumption required for the argument. This is more of an inference, and we are not talking about public health systems and their cost. So this is also irrelevant. Now we are left with option B and C. There has been an uptick in natural disasters and terrorist attack in recent times. Can we assume this based on the argument that there has been an uptick in natural disasters and terrorist attacks? देखो कहाँ पे mentioned है ये. It is said that crises such as natural disaster or terrorist attack are known to trigger short-term sleeplessness. ये बस हमें mentioned है about natural disaster. क्या इस statement के basis पे मैं बोल सकता हूँ कि पिछले कुछ सालों में natural disaster और terrorist attack बढ़ गए हैं? Can I assume that? Not really. They're just giving you a random information. अगर यहाँ पे मैं लिख देता crisis such as let's say flood is known to trigger sleeplessness. Does that mean the flood happened last year? That is the logic, right? Does not make sense. So we cannot really assume that there has been an uptick, which means an increase in natural disasters in recent times. ये recent times की वजह से this becomes a wrong assumption. So A, B, D eliminate हो गए. बचता क्या है? C. Heightened level of stress contribute to short term as well as long term sleeplessness. But देखो ये कैसे valid assumption है? क्योंकि how do you attribute and correlate natural disasters and terrorist attacks as well as a pandemic which had a global impact? इन तीनों चीजों में क्या कॉमन है? इन तीनों चीजों में कॉमन है heightened level of stress as a contributor. Natural disaster, stress. Terrorist attack, stress. Pandemic, stress. So can we assume heightened level of stress contribute to short term as well as long term sleeplessness? Obviously that is a central assumption. क्योंकि अगर आप इसको negate भी करो, heightened level of stress do not contribute to short term as well as long term sleeplessness. तो फिर natural disaster की वजह से क्यों होगा आपको sleeplessness? terrorist attack की वजह से क्यों होगा sleeplessness? pandemic की वजह से क्यों होगा? अगर stress से नहीं हो रहा ये तो और कोई तो common factor है नहीं इन तीनों चीजों के बीच में. So that is why this is a valid assumption. Option number C. Correct? I hope you guys understand why. From both the logics. इसलिए मैं आपको दोनों तरीके से बता रहा हूँ कि how do you reach the answer on your own and how do you reach the answer by elimination. दोनों चीजें आपको आनी चाहिए, सिर्फ एक से काम नहीं चलेगा. ठीक है, चलो. ओके, yes, Priyanshi, you're right. See, okay, moving ahead. Next question. With each and every passing question, you guys would get better at this. The more you practice, it's like a muscle. The more you practice, the better you get at understanding कि क्या assumption है, क्या inference है. Okay, Priyanshi says D, Gayatri says D, Anurit says D, Slime World says B. Okay, interesting. देखो, स्टेटमेंट कह रहा है इंडिया शुड जनरेट सोलर एनर्जी टू मीट इट्स अनमेट एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट्स. ओके, सो लेट्स से इंडियाज एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट इज 100 and out of it let's say unmet energy requirement is 100. Okay, now they are saying India should generate the solar energy to meet its unmet energy requirement. यानी कि मान लो अगर टोटल हमें 1000 चाहिए, उसमें से अनमेट 100 है, तो वो हमें सोलर एनर्जी से करनी चाहिए पूरी. ओके, अब रेस्ट 900 कैसे आ रही है? वी डोंट नो, वी हैव नो आइडिया. कि इज इट कमिंग फ्रॉम नॉन सोलर, इज इट कमिंग फ्रॉम सोलर, इज इट कमिंग फ्रॉम एटॉमिक, इज इट कमिंग फ्रॉम कोल। हम कह रहे हैं जो बची हुई 100 है ना, 1000 हमें चाहिए, 900 हमारे पास है, अनमेट 100 जो है हम सोलर से जनरेट करें। दैट इज द स्टेटमेंट। Assumption one is solar energy is cheaper than other forms of energy. Can we assume that? We don't know. We don't have any information. हो सकता है solar महंगी हो बाकी form of energy से, and we are wanting to produce solar because it is good for the environment, even though it is expensive. So we cannot assume that it is cheaper. So one तो out of question हो गया, which means option A becomes wrong. Two is saying India is capable of generating solar energy. This is definitely a valid assumption, क्योंकि अगर हम इसको negate करें कि India is not capable of generating solar energy, तो फिर हम क्या ही generate करेंगे? Your statement would become senseless, illogical. So obviously we are capable of generating, तभी हम बोल रहे हैं कि should generate solar energy, etc., etc. So two is definitely a valid assumption. Okay. सो दैट मीन्स ऑप्शन सी गलत हो गया, ओनली थ्री वाला। तो बचा क्या क्या सिर्फ टू इम्प्लिसिट है या टू एंड थ्री दोनों? अब थर्ड को देख लेते हैं। इंडिया इज अनेबल टू मीट इट्स एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट्स using non-solar sources of energy. Do we have any information which says that India is unable to meet its energy requirements using non-solar sources of energy? ये जो 900 है इसके बारे में हमारे पास इंफॉर्मेशन है जो हम ये assumption ले सके कि जो हमारी एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट है उसको हम मीट नहीं कर पा रहे यूजिंग नॉन सोलर सोर्सेज ऑफ एनर्जी? वी माइट बी। You don't know. How do you assume that India is unable to meet its energy requirement using non-solar sources of energy? अब आप बोल सकते हो, आपका लॉजिक हो सकता है ये रहा हो कि अगर हम नॉन सोलर से नहीं पूरी कर पा रहे तो इसीलिए तो हम सोलर लगाना चाह रहे हैं, विच ऑन द अपफ्रंट माइट सीम लाइक अ करेक्ट वे टू थिंक। बट अगर आप ध्यान से सोचो, हम बात क्या कर रहे हैं कि इंडिया नहीं जनरेट कर पा रहा अपना एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट यूजिंग नॉन सोलर सोर्सेज ऑफ एनर्जी, इसीलिए हम सोलर यूज कर रहे हैं। बट क्या हम सिर्फ इसीलिए यूज कर रहे हैं क्योंकि हम नॉन सोलर से एनर्जी जनरेट नहीं कर पा रहे? हो सकता है हम नॉन सोलर से एनर्जी जनरेट कर पा रहे हैं, बट आर रीजन इज नॉट बिकॉज वी आर नॉट बीइंग एबल टू जनरेट, बट एनवायरमेंट हम जनरेट कर पा रहे हैं। मान लो लेट्स नेगेटेड है ना, लेट्स से हम कोल से पूरा का पूरा जनरेट कर पा रहे हैं। इंडिया इज एबल टू मीट इट्स एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट यूजिंग नॉन सोलर सोर्सेज ऑफ एनर्जी लाइक कोल। मैंने ये बोल दिया। सो वुड दैट स्टेटमेंट स्टिल होल्ड गुड दैट इंडिया शुड जनरेट सोलर एनर्जी टू मीट इट्स अनमेट? यस। फॉर व्हाट रीजंस? फॉर एनवायरमेंट रीजंस। तो मेरा स्टेटमेंट तब भी सेंस बनाएगा कि हमें अगर हम पूरी कर भी पा रहे हैं तो भी सोलर से पूरी करनी चाहिए क्योंकि वो एनवायरमेंट के लिए अच्छा है। ये मैं बस एक एग्जांपल दे रहा हूँ आपको, है ना। सो इसलिए हम थर्ड वाला अज्यूम नहीं कर सकते कि इंडिया इज अनेबल टू मीट इट्स एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट यूजिंग नॉन सोलर सोर्स ऑफ एनर्जी। डू यू गाइस अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से? तो इस वजह से ओनली द सेकंड वन इज अ वैलिड assumption which makes option B to be the correct answer. हाँ प्रियांशी, वही तो मैं कह रहा हूँ। इफ वी नेगेट थ्री इज, वही तो बता रहा था मैं आपको। देखो इंडिया, इसको नेगेट करो तो क्या होगा? इंडिया इज एबल टू मीट इट्स एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट यूजिंग नॉन सोलर सोर्सेज ऑफ एनर्जी, लेट्स से कोल। ठीक है, ये बोल दिया मैंने। अब assumption का सही टेस्ट क्या होता है? अगर आप नेगेट करो तो योर स्टेटमेंट शुड बिकम इलॉजिकल। Is your statement becoming illogical? No, I gave you the logic. The logic is India should generate solar energy to meet its unmet energy requirement because it is good for the environment. I gave you logic. It is not becoming illogical. It still can hold true. It is not becoming baseless. So that means it is not a valid assumption. ठीक है, चलो। Okay, so that makes option B to be the correct answer. Let's do one more question, one last question for the day. Slime World says C, Anureet says C, Gayatri says C, Priyanshi says C. So you guys got the gist now. Okay, ठीक है. To catch the rats running around in the house, you should use a rat trap. रैट्स आर लाइकली टू स्टेप इनटू रैट ट्रैप्स. एब्सोल्युटली करेक्ट अजम्पशन. क्योंकि अगर आप नेगेट करो कि रैट्स आर नॉट लाइकली टू स्टेप इनटू रैट ट्रैप्स, तो फिर फायदा ही क्या हुआ? योर स्टेटमेंट वुड मेक नो सेंस, व्हिच मींस दिस इज अ वैलिड assumption. Food will be kept inside the rat trap. We don't know. It might be glue. It might be anything else. It might be a firecracker. Anything. I don't know. So, जरूरी नहीं है कि food will be kept inside the rat trap. That is not a valid assumption. Rat traps are small in size. Again, we cannot really assume they're small in size. You can have a large rat trap also. So cannot assume 2 and 3, which means only 1 is the valid assumption, which means option C is the correct answer. And all of you are correct, which is wonderful. I hope this was a good learning experience. We got better with every question, which was great. And in the next class, we'll start a new topic. Most likely, we'll start with conclusions, and we'll study what are conclusions and do some practice of conclusions, which would happen next Wednesday. Tomorrow we'll restart with 3 p.m. Hindu analysis, and then 8 p.m. your another class, subject class. And I will see you again tomorrow at 3 p.m. on the channel. Till then, take care, keep learning, keep preparing. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Good night, guys. Signing off.